My beloved child, created for inspiration, but within this story, something extraordinary is unfolding right now. Someone you love woke up this morning carrying a thought they could no longer keep buried. Before the day became crowded with noise, before messages arrived, before responsibilities pulled them into the ordinary rhythm of life, they opened their heart to their Father and spoke about you, and what they said was not casual, it was not a passing mention, it was not the kind of conversation someone has when they are simply remembering an old friend. There was emotion in their voice, there was hesitation. There was something they had been carrying for much longer than anyone realized. So pause here. Let everything else wait for a few minutes. Because in this fictional story, the conversation that happened this morning becomes the doorway into a truth that has been hidden behind silence, uncertainty, and fear. You may have wondered why this person has seemed different lately. Maybe they have become quieter. Maybe their messages have changed. Maybe there are moments when they seem close to you emotionally, followed by moments when they suddenly retreat behind a wall you cannot understand. Perhaps you have asked yourself whether you imagined the connection. Perhaps you have wondered whether the feelings were ever as deep as they seemed. Perhaps you have even tried to convince yourself that it would be easier to stop caring. But there is a reason the story has not ended, and this morning, something inside them finally moved. They woke earlier than usual. The room was quiet. The world outside had not yet demanded anything from them. There was no audience, no pressure, no reason to pretend. And in that stillness, your memory appeared, not as a distant thought, not as an ordinary recollection, but as something alive enough to make them stop what they were doing. They remembered your face, they remembered your voice, they remembered a conversation that neither of you realized would remain with them for so long, and suddenly, the questions they had been avoiding became impossible to ignore. Why do I still think about this person? Why does their absence affect me this much? Why do I feel like there is still something unfinished? Why do I keep imagining what might have happened if I had been braver? That final question opened a door, and behind that door was everything they had never told you. They had been trying to appear certain, but they were not certain. They had been trying to appear unaffected, but they were not unaffected. They had been trying to move forward, without explaining what happened inside their heart, but every step forward somehow carried your memory with it, and this morning, they finally admitted that to someone they trusted, their father. At first, the conversation was ordinary, a simple morning, a few familiar words, the kind of conversation that could have ended within minutes. Then something changed. Their father noticed the hesitation. There was a pause before your name was mentioned, a breath that seemed to carry more emotion than the words themselves. And then they said something that made the entire conversation different. They said, "There is someone I still can't stop thinking about." Their father did not immediately respond. Perhaps he already understood that this was not about a passing attraction. Perhaps he heard something in their voice that revealed how deeply the subject had touched them. So he simply listened, and slowly, your story entered the room, not the version of you that everyone else knows, not the public version, not the convenient version, the version they remember when nobody is watching, They spoke about the way you made them feel understood. They spoke about moments when you seemed to notice things they had never said aloud. They remembered your patience. They remembered your kindness. They remembered the strange comfort of being around someone who did not demand that they pretend to be stronger than they really were. And then came the confession that surprised even them. They admitted that they had been afraid, not afraid of you, afraid of what loving you might require. Because love can be beautiful when it is imagined from a distance, but when love becomes real, it asks difficult questions. Can you communicate when you are hurt? Can you remain honest when silence feels easier? Can you apologize without turning pride into a weapon? Can you stay when the first excitement disappears and real life begins? Can you allow another person to know the parts of you that you usually hide? Those questions had been following them, and this morning, they finally stopped running. Their father asked them what they actually wanted. The room became quiet. They looked away. They thought for several seconds, and then they answered with words that revealed more than they intended. I don't want to lose them. Those words were simple, but behind them was an entire history. Every moment they had held back, every message they had rewritten, every time they almost reached out, every memory they pretended did not matter, every night they told themselves that enough time would eventually make the feelings disappear. It had not. Instead, the silence had made the feelings clearer. Their father asked another question. If you don't want to lose them, why have you been distant? And there it was, the question they had been avoiding. The answer was not easy. They admitted that they had become afraid of being rejected. They admitted that part of them believed you might eventually realize they were not the person you thought they were. They admitted that they had spent years learning how to protect themselves from disappointment. And then they said something even more revealing. I don't know how to let someone matter to me without worrying that they can hurt me. Their father listened, and perhaps, in that moment, they finally understood that the greatest obstacle between you was not another person. It was not distance. It was not timing. It was not a lack of feeling. It was fear. Fear had been speaking for them. Fear had been choosing their silences. Fear had been deciding when to move closer and when to retreat. Fear had been convincing them that withholding their heart would somehow keep them safe. But this morning, they saw the cost of that protection. They realized that a heart can be protected so carefully that it eventually becomes lonely. And they did not want that loneliness anymore. They wanted something real, something steady, something that could survive ordinary days, difficult conversations, misunderstandings, and the inevitable imperfections of two human beings trying to build something meaningful. Then their father asked the question that changed the conversation completely. Have you told this person how you feel? Silence, a long silence, and then a quiet answer. No. That one word carried everything. No, they had not told you. No, they had not explained. No, they had not admitted how often you crossed their mind. No, they had not told you how much certain memories still mattered. No, they had not told you that sometimes they wished they could return to one particular moment and choose differently. And no, they had not told you the sentence they had secretly rehearsed more times than they could count. The sentence began with your name, but they could never finish it. Their father encouraged them to stop waiting for a perfect moment. Because perfect moments rarely arrive, life does not usually announce when an important conversation is about to disappear forever. Sometimes the opportunity is simply there, sometimes the person is still listening. Sometimes the heart is still open, and sometimes the greatest regret comes from believing there will always be another chance to say what should have been said today. Those words stayed with them. They changed the way they looked at the rest of the morning. They began thinking about you differently, not as a memory, not as someone from a chapter they had already closed, but as someone they might still have a chance to understand. And then something happened that they did not expect. They began remembering the first moment they realized you were important. It was not dramatic. There was no grand announcement, no cinematic declaration. It was something incredibly small. Maybe it was the way you laughed at something that nobody else found funny. Maybe it was the way you listened without interrupting. Maybe it was the way you remembered something they had mentioned days earlier. Whatever it was, they remembered the feeling. They felt seen, and they had not realized how rare that feeling was until you were no longer as close as before. That memory became the emotional center of the conversation. They told their father that there was something about you that felt different, not perfect, not effortless, different. You made them want to become more honest. You made them question patterns they had accepted for years. You made them imagine a future that required more courage than they were accustomed to giving. And that future frightened them, but it also called to them. Then came another confession. They admitted that they had imagined what it would be like to tell you everything, not through a hurried text, not through a vague message sent late at night, but face to face, with nothing hidden. They imagined telling you that they were sorry for the confusion, sorry for the distance, sorry for the moments when their actions contradicted their feelings. They imagined telling you that their silence was never proof that you meant nothing. Sometimes silence was simply the only language they knew when emotions became too large for them to manage. But then they imagined your response. And that is where the fear returned. What if you no longer feel the same? What if you have moved on? What if you listened to everything and simply said, "It's too late"? That possibility frightened them. Yet their father gave them something to think about. If you never speak, you will never know. That sentence followed them long after the conversation ended. And now, in the fictional story unfolding around you, they are carrying a decision. Not a fantasy, not a promise that everything will magically become perfect, a decision to become honest. Because they finally understand something they had overlooked. Love is not proven by how intensely someone feels in private. Love becomes meaningful when feelings are translated into respectful, consistent action. That realization changed the nature of their longing. They no longer wanted merely to be remembered by you. They wanted to be understood by you. They no longer wanted to wonder whether you still cared. They wanted to have the courage to ask. They no longer wanted to imagine a future. They wanted to discover whether a future was actually possible, and that is why this morning mattered, because for the first time, they said your name in a conversation where they could not hide behind ambiguity. They admitted that you still mattered. They admitted that the connection had changed them. They admitted that part of them still hoped there was something left to save, but there was one sentence they said after all of that that made their father go completely silent. It was not about wanting you back. It was not about missing you. It was not even about love. It was about what they believed would have to change if the two of you ever tried again. They said, "If I ever go back to them, I can't do it the way I did before." Those words reveal something important. They are beginning to understand that returning is not enough. A reunion without growth simply recreates the same wound. A conversation without honesty only postpones the next misunderstanding. A promise without consistent action eventually becomes another source of disappointment. So they are not merely asking whether they still love you. They are asking whether they are capable of loving you differently. That is a much harder question, and it is the question they are now carrying into the rest of this day. They may still hesitate. They may still become nervous. They may still overthink what to say. But something has changed inside them. They are no longer completely comfortable with silence. Because silence used to protect them from rejection, now silence is beginning to feel like a choice they may regret. And there is another reason. During that conversation with their father, they revealed one memory they had never told anyone before, a moment involving you. A moment so small that you may not even remember it, but they remember every detail. They remember where they were. They remember what you said. They remember what they felt. And according to this fictional story, that memory became the reason they first began wondering whether you were more important to them than they had admitted. But the memory contains one detail that changes the entire meaning of their conversation. A detail they have kept hidden for a very long time. When they finally told their father what happened that day, his response was not what they expected. He looked at them and asked one final question, a question that forced them to confront the truth they had been avoiding since the day they met you. And when they answered, they realized that the next step could no longer be postponed, because the answer was connected to you, connected to the decision they are now considering, and connected to a message they may finally send before this day is over. But what exactly did they tell their father about that unforgettable moment, and why did those few words make them realize that, if they truly want you in their future, they will have to reveal something they have never confessed to you before? That secret is still waiting, and it is the part of this, my beloved child. Something happened this morning that changed the way one heart sees another. A conversation took place behind closed doors. In the quiet space where people finally stop pretending they are unaffected. The person you love opened up to their father about you, and what they said was not casual, not careless, and not something they expected anyone else to ever know. Pause here for a moment. Let the noise around you fade. Imagine the early light entering a quiet room, the world still waking, the air carrying that strange stillness that comes before an important conversation. Somewhere, away from your eyes, the person whose name has occupied so many of your thoughts sat with someone they trusted enough to reveal what they had been hiding. Their father asked a simple question, and they were not prepared for what came out of their mouth. At first, they tried to answer normally. They tried to keep the conversation ordinary, because that is what they had become good at doing. They had spent so long protecting the most vulnerable parts of themselves that even saying your name felt like opening a door they had kept locked. But this morning was different. Something inside them had reached its limit. The silence had become heavier than the truth. So they finally spoke about you. And before you imagine that this was merely a conversation about missing someone, stay with the story. Because the first thing they said was not what their father expected to hear. They said they were tired of pretending that you did not matter. Those words came slowly, almost reluctantly, as though saying them aloud made everything suddenly real. Their father looked at them carefully, perhaps sensing that this was not an ordinary conversation. There was something in their expression that revealed the struggle behind the words. They were not speaking from excitement alone. They were speaking from a place where affection, regret, fear, and hope had been fighting each other for far too long. They admitted that they had tried to move on emotionally. They admitted that they had told themselves the connection was temporary. They admitted that they had convinced themselves that time would eventually make your memory less powerful. But time had done the opposite. It had made the truth harder to ignore. Your face still appeared in unexpected moments. Your words returned during quiet evenings. Small details about you remained stored in their memory with an accuracy that surprised even them. And there was one particular memory they mentioned to their father, a moment you may have believed they had forgotten. They had not. They remembered exactly how you looked when you were trying to hide your feelings. They remembered the change in your voice when something mattered deeply to you. They remembered a conversation that seemed ordinary at the time but later became one of the moments they replayed most often. Their father listened. He did not interrupt. And then he asked the question that made the person you love finally confront the deepest part of the story. If this person matters so much, why are you still holding back? Silence, long silence, the kind of silence that says more than an answer could. They looked away, because they knew the truth. They had not been holding back because they felt nothing. They had been holding back because they felt too much. That distinction changed everything. You see, some people become distant when their emotions become insignificant. Others become distant when those emotions become impossible to control. This person belongs to the second kind. They have been trying to understand why your presence affected them so deeply. They could not explain why a simple conversation with you could remain in their mind for hours. They could not explain why your absence sometimes felt louder than the presence of everyone around them, and they certainly could not explain why the possibility of losing you permanently frightened them. Their father asked whether they loved you. This time, they did not answer immediately. Their eyes became distant, and then they said something that made the entire conversation change direction. I don't know if I'm afraid of loving them. They paused. Or afraid that I've already loved them more than I intended. That was the moment the truth began unfolding. They admitted that you had become connected to a future they had once imagined without anyone else. They had pictured ordinary things, not dramatic scenes, not impossible fantasies, ordinary mornings, shared meals, long conversations after difficult days, someone to call when something wonderful happened. Someone whose silence did not feel empty. Someone who could sit beside them without requiring them to perform. and somehow, whenever they pictured that kind of peace, you appeared there. They had never planned it. That was what frightened them. They did not consciously choose to place you in their future. Their heart simply kept doing it. Their father asked another question. What do you want from them? This time, the answer came quickly. Honesty. Only one word. But behind that word was an entire history. They did not want you to promise perfection. They did not expect you to understand every fear. They did not need you to erase their past. They wanted honesty because they were finally beginning to understand that uncertainty had hurt more than truth ever could. They confessed that there had been moments when they wanted to reach out to you and simply say everything. No games, no hidden meanings, no waiting for the perfect moment, just truth. But every time they came close, fear returned. What if you did not feel the same? What if you had already moved on? What if they opened their heart only to discover that the door on your side had already closed, that fear had stopped them again and again? But this morning, something inside them shifted. Their father noticed. He asked what had changed, and the person you love looked down for a moment before quietly answering.